If you've ever used any smart lights before, you'll know the biggest annoyance is when the physical switch is turned off. Whether you accidentally turn it off by the switch as a force of habit, or someone else in your house just wants the light off, the light stops working and requires you to physically switch it back on, defeating the purpose of having a smart light in the first place. So, why does this happen? Well, each smart light connects to your Wi-Fi or maybe to your phone via Bluetooth, which is what enables it to be controlled from your phone or via a voice assistant like Amazon Alexa or Siri. When you use the app or your voice to turn off the light, a command is sent to the light and it stops emitting light, but the device itself remains on. This is so it can maintain a connection to your Wi-Fi to allow it to receive further commands such as turn it back on again. If the physical switch is turned off, the device itself loses power and you have no way of turning the light back on from the app or via your voice until that physical switch is turned back on again. Enter the LIFX Smart Switch. The Smart Switch is a 4-gang or relay switch, allowing control of up to 4 smart or dumb lights. Made by Australian company LIFX, who you might have heard of for their smart lights, the switch is designed to replace your existing light switch. It has a couple of killer features. Firstly, if you have non-smart lights controlled by that switch, it can make them smart, letting you turn them off or on again via your phone or voice assistant. Secondly, if you have smart lights, the switch knows they need constant power and so only sends the command to turn the light off, but leaves the device physically on, so you can turn it off again or on again. At least that's the idea. Let's dive in and take a look. To begin, let me give some context on why I ordered the smart switches. Across my house, I already had 10 LIFX 100mm downlights. I really wanted to be able to control these lights from my phone, and I also like setting my lights to different colors, as you can see here, depending on my mood. But I was constantly finding that I'd reach for the switch to turn on and off the lights as I left or entered the room. This meant I'd often find lights unresponsive as they were switched off when I wanted to use them. So in December 2020, I decided to pull the trigger on 3 white LIFX smart switches. It was a little bit annoying that it took nearly a month to come, but this delivery date was highlighted when I ordered it, so it wasn't unexpected. A side note, I've been following the LIFX subreddit and it looks like they're currently experiencing some supply chain issues, so you might experience a similar delay. The LIFX Smart Switch is exactly the same size as a regular power point or switch, measuring in at 120mm by 72mm with a depth of 37mm. It can come in either white or black options, and both options have gold outline buttons, with a gold dot in the middle of each button. I opted for the white version because the rest of my house is generally white, but the black option looks really nice too. Each of the buttons on the Smart Switch is just an indent in the plastic, and with the switch powered off, you actually don't feel anything when you put your finger on the button and press. LIFX has gone for a haptic touch design similar to the trackpad in a MacBook. Instead of having any moving parts, the buttons are kind of like small touchscreens, and when you tap them and the switch is on, a motor inside the switch causes it to vibrate a little bit. This gives you some haptic feedback when you touch the button without the button actually moving. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why LIFX has opted for this design, but I'd guess it's so there's less moving parts and chance of failure, plus it's kind of a novel experience using it. Once I got my hands on the switches, installation was fairly painless. The switch required both a live wire and a neutral wire to work at all, and luckily I live in a recently constructed building, so there was actually already a neutral wire at the switch. But I've read online that some older places may not necessarily have this, so you should definitely check this before you order the switch. It then has 4 terminals for connecting up to 4 dumb lights that you want to connect, and each one of these is a light that you'll be able to control via the switch, or via the LIFX app. In Australia, you need an electrician to install any switch by law, so I got an electrician friend over and we probably spent 15 minutes installing all 3 switches. Fortunately, they use the exact same standard screw holes as my existing switches, so there wasn't any re-drilling necessary. One thing to note is the LED light of the switch should always be in the bottom left corner, as it's pretty easy to get this switch upside down. The most complicated part of the installation was surprisingly the software side of it. Before you configure the switch, by default each button turns the relay behind it off and on. The switch isn't necessarily already in the setup mode, so you may need to factory reset it, which puts it into setup mode. So, to get the switch into setup mode, you need to hold down all 4 buttons for 10 seconds. Remember earlier how I said each button is kind of like a mini touchscreen and not a real button? And also remember earlier how I said by default each button turns the relay behind it off and on? And remember earlier how I said I already had LIFX downlights? Well, unfortunately the way to reset a LIFX downlight is by turning it off and on 5 times. And so during the setup of the switches, I think I managed to reset every single LIFX downlight. The maneuver for resetting the switch is pretty hard to get right. You need to apply a constant touch to all 4 buttons for 10 seconds, which is surprisingly tricky. If you get it wrong or lose touch for even a few milliseconds, this starts it again and can end up turning your lights off and on. If you muck it up a few times in a row like I did, it can cause your LIFX downlights to reset, requiring you now to not only set up the switch, but also all the lights again. Anyway, maybe this is a niche complaint, but it would be good if the setup action wasn't so complicated. Once the switch is in this mode, you're good to go. It'll create its own Wi-Fi network, which you should connect to from your phone. From here, you can open the LIFX app, add a new device, and set up the switch. In this settings screen, you can set the button to control two light types. The first is a LIFX light, which lets you either toggle on or off a particular device, group, or location, or you can have it trigger a scene. Here, you also indicate whether the LIFX light is physically wired to that switch, so it knows to keep it powered at all times. Alternatively, you can mark the button as a non-LIFX, aka dumb light, which just lets you name it. From here, you're done with the installation, so let me get into the pros and cons of the LIFX Smart Switch. Firstly, I really like the design of the switches. They bring a really modern look to that classic light switch look, and they look great in my modern apartment. When the switch has power, each of the 4 buttons has an orange ring around it. This is fairly dim, but makes it easier to find the light switch in the night. The buttons are slightly recessed, and in the middle have a dot which is illuminated the same as the ring. When you tap on one of the buttons, the ring glows brighter for a few seconds, and if it's a non-LIFX light, it'll actually stay illuminated to indicate that the switch is on. Interestingly, the ring doesn't remain illuminated if it's a LIFX light. I guess this is because you can configure it to switch to a scene, which isn't necessarily on or off, but I'm not sure why it couldn't show the on or off state for individual lights, groups, or entire locations. This isn't too important, as I can pretty easily figure if the lights are off or on if I'm actually in the room, because the switch is in the same room as the lights, but I could imagine this would be useful if you had a switch controlling a light in another location, like a front porch or something. Another interesting omission is the ability to customize the color of the ring at all. Given the rings can turn red when something goes wrong, for example, like when it can't communicate with one of the LIFX lights you're trying to control, I suspect these are actually RGB rings, which leads me to believe that LIFX could potentially give you the option with a software update in the future to decide what color the rings are, or even use colors to show you different states. Not a deal breaker at all, but surprising given the hardware is there. Curiously, controlling non-LIFX lights is the better experience. When you tap the button, the light reacts instantly and there's an audible click sound, which is the relay turning off or on. By adding non-LIFX devices to your smart switch, LIFX exposes these to Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa, allowing you to control non-smart lights from your voice assistant. I actually have these set up to my ceiling fans and to turn them off or on, which is super useful when you're lying in bed and you really want that cool breeze without getting out of bed. Unfortunately, there's a minor bug where the device seems to multiply itself in the Google Home app and doesn't remain assigned to the room you've put it in. Usually with devices in the same room as the Google Home, I can say something like, turn off the fan, and it knows exactly which fan I want to turn off. What I actually get is turning off 5 fans, which turns off all the fans in my house, and I actually only even have 2 of them. I'm not sure if this is a bug with Google Home or LIFX though, but I thought I'd bring it up anyway. Because I got fans instead of lights, I had to put the switches in their own group in the LIFX app. If you haven't used the LIFX app before, groups are used to designate rooms. So for example, my bedroom is a group. But when I had the fan in this group, if I then hit the switch button to turn off or on the bedroom, the fan also turned off and on. So by putting the fan in its own group, I'm able to control the lights off and on without affecting the fan. This wouldn't work if I had any other non-LIFX lights on the same switch though. I would love to see more ways to be able to group lights, or at least allowing lights to be part of multiple different groups. You could put them in a scene, but then you're unable to toggle the lights off and on with the same button. It just sets it to that particular scene. Moving on to my experience with controlling LIFX lights, unfortunately the biggest downside is something anyone who uses the switch notices straight away, which is the lag. When you tap the button, it often takes 2 or 3 seconds for the lights to respond. This is pretty infuriating, especially when you're walking into a dark room and you can't see until your lights decide it's time to turn on. The reason this happens is the switch needs to go out to the internet to trigger your LIFX lights, even if both the switch and the lights are on the same network. When you use either the LIFX app or the Apple HomeKit app, the lights respond instantly, and I don't think it's unreasonable to expect this from a switch from exactly the same manufacturer. Interestingly, LIFX has promised HomeKit support is coming soon for the switches. HomeKit requires the device to be accessible over the local network, without internet, so maybe when this comes, this problem will be solved via a software update. This would also mean you could use the switch to control anything that's available on HomeKit, not just LIFX devices. However, LIFX has said status updates were going to come from Q1 2020, and we're now in Q3 of 2021 with no news. They even begun allowing pre-orders of a 2-button switch, and on that promo page they're advertising HomeKit support, so hopefully it's not too far away. But I wouldn't get my hopes up or order this switch in the chance that it'll come soon. The other issue with these switches, which you might have got already, is that they require internet access. So what happens when your internet or Wi-Fi goes down? Fortunately, this has only happened once to me since we got them, but it was really annoying not being able to control anything. The status LED in the bottom left of the switch started blinking red on all of the switches, and I had to get out my phone to control any of the lights. Before I moved into this apartment, I used to have a Philips Hue setup, and I had both the smart wireless dimmer and the smart tap switch. Both of these don't require an electrician to install, as they're kind of essentially remotes that stick to your wall, or can be mounted to your wall like a regular switch. They also have greater flexibility in terms of functionality. Not only can you do more than just turn lights on and off, you can dim groups as well. But you can also do more than just the 4 actions with the use of double, triple and quadruple taps. Unfortunately, I don't have a Philips Hue hub here, but if you already had one, you could definitely use their switches to control your LIFX lights via HomeKit. This makes them infinitely more customizable and you don't get any lag. Ultimately, most of the things I mentioned are not deal breakers at all. I'm not too fussed with the color of the buttons or being able to do 16 different actions with the switches. I really like being able to control non-smart lights, essentially turning them into smart lights, and this is probably the saving grace of why you'd buy a LIFX switch over a different HomeKit enabled switch. I like how seamless these are to install, replacing your existing switches, and they do look and feel a very high quality. However, the main thing I want is a really good experience turning off and on lights from the same manufacturer as the switch, which unfortunately I don't get. The lag between tapping the buttons and the lights responding, combined with the need for an internet connection for the switches to work, both make me hesitate to recommend these for anyone in a similar situation. Obviously, I've already committed to 3 of these, but if I was to do it again, I'd probably replace my existing switches with something HomeKit enabled, and find a different way to make my fans respond to a voice assistant. If LIFX can get HomeKit support enabled though, I think that would fix the lag and increase the flexibility of the switches, which maybe would make me reconsider my recommendation. Thanks for watching this Technologetic video. If you're interested in more smart home videos, check out my bathroom where I installed a LIFX Z strip, and subscribe for more videos in the future.